He was only a small white puppy, paws still clumsy on the cool tiles of a quiet suburban house. When the first whispers began, not words exactly, but a hum beneath the floorboards, a faint shimmer in the air that tickled the inside of his ears. Outside, the street lamps glowed like patient sentinels, and the scent of cut grass drifted in through an open window. Inside, the family moved about in their evening rhythm. Television low, a pot simmering somewhere, the smell of warmth and onion and memory. Snowball did not know his name yet, not fully. He only knew that when the tall one bent down and touched his head, a low, comforting sound followed, and a hand scratched the soft space behind his ear. But the puppy was already noticing things other dogs did not. The pulse of the refrigerator, the odd flicker of blue light under the basement door, the way the night sky seemed to lean closer on certain evenings. These things did not frighten him. They only felt like an invitation. He would sit at the edge of the rug and tilt his head, listening. Somewhere in the walls a machine hummed a tone almost like a lullaby. Sometimes it rose, sometimes it fell, as if breathing. He did not understand what it meant, but the sound curled into his dreams at night and left behind strange pictures, shapes of stars, of metal crowns, of doors opening to hidden rooms. The puppy's tail would twitch as he slept, chasing images only he could see. The family thought he was simply curious, but it was more than curiosity. Snowball felt something inside him stretch, like a yawn of the spirit. He could sense kindness before it arrived, footsteps before they crossed the hall, even a hint of sadness in the boy's sighs before the boy himself knew it. In these small moments, the world began to seem larger than the house, larger than the yard, larger even than the neighborhood where sprinklers hissed and cars dozed under trees. On nights when the house was silent, he would pad to the basement door and rest his head against it. Through the wood came that soft electric whisper, neither warm nor cold, neither friendly nor hostile, simply present, like the sky's own heartbeat. He didn't bark or whine, he just listened, eyes half closed, as if the sound might tell him a secret about who he was meant to be. And somewhere beyond the walls, past the porch and the quiet lawns, the stars shone with the same pale light that lived behind his eyes. Snowball could not name it, but a small part of him already understood. Life held more than meals and walks and sleep. It held a hidden language waiting to be heard. It happened on a night when the house felt like a seashell, every sound echoing faintly inside its walls. Rain was not falling, but the air itself seemed wet. A hush of static clinging to the curtains and the fur at the back of Snowball's neck. The family had gone to sleep earlier than usual, and the boy's room was dark except for a blue-green glow seeping up from the basement. Snowball lay curled at the foot of the stairs, nose tucked under his paw, pretending to be asleep, though his ears flickered with each low hum rising from below. He had grown used to the strange rhythms under the floor, but tonight the hum was different. It pulsed like a heart learning a new beat. It was softer than thunder, yet sharper than the refrigerator's buzz, a tone that seemed to stroke the inside of his skull. In his drowsy mind, shapes began to assemble, lines of light, a circle, a crown of little teeth around it. He shifted his paws uneasily. Dogs are not supposed to imagine circles, yet there it was, glowing behind his eyes, refusing to fade. At some hour between late and later, a door creaked. The tall one, the one whose scent was metal and coffee, descended the stairs, carrying something cradled in his hands. Snowball lifted his head. The object was not food, not a leash, not a toy. It was a helmet of sorts. Smooth, silver, oddly gentle for a machine, like a polished seashell, with wires instead of ridges. Under the basement light its edges gleamed blue, and the hum grew louder, resolving into a slow, shimmering chord. Snowball followed, paws silent, tail low. At the bottom of the steps the basement opened like a hidden world. Tables of glass and steel, blinking diodes, Soft steam rising from a cup left too long untouched. The tall one placed the helmet on a padded stool and adjusted dials on a panel that glowed like a miniature horizon. He muttered words. Snowball did not know, yet the sound of them felt like ripples on water patterns, not noise. The puppy edged closer. He smelled warm solder, ozone, a sweetness like heated plastic, but also something else, a scent of possibility, as though the room itself were exhaling a secret. His paws hesitated at the boundary where carpet ended and cold concrete began. Instinct told him to stop, but curiosity felt like a leash pulling him forward. When the helmet was lifted, it was not to crown the inventor's head, but his own. The tall one turned, eyes soft in the blue glow, and with a kind of distracted tenderness lowered the device towards Snowball's brow. It was not a gesture of malice, it was almost a caress, like fitting a collar, except this collar hummed and smelled of storms. Snowball trembled but did not resist. Something in the man's scent, regret, perhaps, or hope, told him this was not a punishment. The rim touched his fur with a faint static kiss. A hush swept through the basement, and the hum changed key. For an instant there was no light at all, only a field of tiny pinpricks, like dust motes lit from within. Snowball blinked. He could still see the room, the dials, the man's face, but layered over it were other images. Staircases spiraling upward into clouds, bones of stars, a memory of running across an endless field, though he had never left the yard. His heart beat fast. His tail wagged once, then still. Thought came to him not as words but as clear shapes. He saw the concept of warm and friend, like two colors blending. He felt Y rise like a bubble and pop before it could form a bark. Bewilderment swirled through him. He had always known hunger, comfort, play, sleep. Now, without warning, he sensed patterns in the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of the clock, the unspoken moods of the humans upstairs. It was not power, it was clarity, bright, strange, and a little cold. He whimpered softly. The tall one knelt and steadied the helmet with a careful hand. Murmuring reassurance, Snowball looked up, eyes shining, and for a flicker of a second he almost noticed the man's mutterings. Not the words, but the yearning behind them, a wish to be understood, to be forgiven, to be something more than a tinkerer of odd devices. Snowball's ears tilted as if trying to catch a language just beyond hearing. The blue light pulsed again, the room's edges softened. His Snowball's nose twitched at scents from far away. Rain on a street he had never walked, fur of a dog he had never met, the cool mineral tang of stars seen from a mountaintop he had never climbed. He wobbled on his paws, dizzy. This was not a trick or a treat. This was the world folding open like a page, revealing handwriting meant for someone else but now drifting into his eyes. He padded a step back, helmet still on, and sat, his tail curled around him like a question mark. He could feel his own heartbeat echoing the machine's low chord. He wanted to bark, but instead breathed out a quiet huff, a sound almost like a sigh. He did not know yet that this was the first flicker of what the man would call speech. He only knew the air felt different now, like a window opened on a night you thought was closed. Upstairs, the house remained asleep. The boy dreamed of running with his dog in a sunlit yard, unaware that below his room the dog was seeing another yard entirely, one made of blue light and endless possibility. Snowball closed his eye. He felt the helmet's hum slide into a softer tone, like a lullaby written for circuits and fur alike. Bewilderment became drowsy clarity. The puppy's body swayed, and he leaned his head gently against the man's knee, seeking a familiar anchor in this new ocean of sensation. For a long time they stayed like that, man and dog, blue light washing over them, the invention humming its secret. The tall one stared at some point far away, perhaps imagining fame or perhaps simply wondering if he had gone too far. Snowball stared at nothing at all, eyes half-lidded, absorbing a world whose edges he could now feel, but not name. The basement smelled of solder and dreams. Somewhere in the darkness above, a clock ticked toward morning, and in that ticking, in that quiet, something had shifted forever. Not a storm, not a battle cry, just a small, invisible turning of gears inside a puppy's mind, like a door beginning to crack. Snowball did not understand what it meant, but the blue glow behind his eyelids would stay with him from that night onward, a soft and bewildering light he would always be chasing. Morning drifted into the house like pale milk poured over a table, quiet and slow. Snowball lay curled on the warm carpet, paws tucked under his chest, helmet now gone but its echo still humming faintly inside him. The ticking clock on the wall counted seconds like small footfalls in an empty hall. Each tick felt clearer than before, each vibration mapping itself across his new sense of hearing. He blinked and the carpet's threads rose like tiny fields, each one a hill of color he had never noticed, honey gold, sun brown, faint threads of blue shimmering at the edges, as if sunlight were stitched inside them. He lifted his nose. The smells of the house no longer arrived as a single blur but as layered pages, toast, and under it a ghost of butter, fabric softener on a folded blanket, and under it the sharper note of detergent. The human boy's scent, tangled with pencil lead and the sweet resin of toy blocks. Even the air itself had a flavor, faint iron from the radiator, dust warmed by morning light, a trace of faraway rain. It was as if the world had opened a window and invited him to read. Snowball rolled onto his back, paws in the air, and watched the ceiling. A spider's web hung in one corner, barely visible. Now he could see the pattern of it, each strand reflecting the dawn like a string of pearls. He followed its spiral inward and felt a little tremor of recognition, though he could not name it. Circles inside circles, just like the glowing image from the night before. He wriggled, tail thumping gently, overwhelmed but not afraid. Wonder filled him like a slow tide. The boy came down the hallway, still drowsy, dragging a blanket. Snowball's ears caught the rhythm of his footsteps long before his eyes did. Each step had a signature sound, heel, toe, soft shuffle, and each shuffle carried a mood. This morning the boy's steps were slow and heavy, and Snowball sensed a sadness like a cloud passing over sun. He padded over and pressed his nose to the boy's hand. The boy knelt, buried his fingers in Snowball's fur, and for a moment their hearts beat almost together. No words were exchanged, but Snowball felt the boy's sigh soften into a small smile. Something inside him glowed at the contact, as if kindness itself were a scent. Later, alone in the living room, Snowball began to explore. He followed the path of sunlight across the floorboards, noticing how it shifted grain by grain as the clock ticked. Shadows moved like slow rivers. He traced them with his paw, then sniffed at the lines where shadow met light, as if they might hold a hidden doorway. Outside the window the yard was still, grass tipped with dew. Each droplet sparkled like a tiny star fallen from the sky. He imagined a map of them stretching out beyond the fence, constellations of water he could step across. He padded to the back door and sat. Birds were singing, but now each note unfolded like a ribbon, a warble layered with a chirp, a trill echoed by another farther away. He tilted his huzz and closed his eyes. The sounds gathered around him, a soft orchestra. He could feel patterns like threads weaving a tapestry in the air. For a moment he imagined he could lift a paw and pluck a sound as if it were a string. The thought made him shiver and laugh in the way only a puppy can. A puff of breath, a small bounce of pause. When he dozed, dreams arrived differently. Before they had been flashes chasing a ball, warmth of a lap, simple pictures. Now they came as long corridors of images. In one he walked across an endless carpet patterned with paw prints, each print containing a tiny moving sky. In another he floated above the house, seeing the roofs as soft squares, the streetlights as patient stars. He felt not larger but more connected, like a thread tied to many other threads. He did not know why these visions came. He only knew they left him with a quiet sweetness, as if someone had sung to him from far away. Waking, he pressed his nose to the ticking clock. Each tick touched his whiskers like a heartbeat. He counted them without meaning to, then stopped. Puzzled at the act of counting, he pawed at the air, then at his own reflection in the glass of the clock. His eyes seemed deeper, as though small lights moved behind them. He tilted his head until the world blurred, then blinked it back into focus. Colors were richer, edges softer. The carpet felt like a field. The ceiling smelled like rain. Even silence seemed full of shapes. The tall one passed through the room carrying papers. Snowball watched him without moving. He could sense tension in the man's shoulders, a ripple of guilt in his scent, but also a fragile hope. For a second their eyes met. Snowball wanted to speak, but only managed a soft whine, low and questioning. The man paused, crouched, and stroked his head absent-mindedly before moving on. The touch left a trail of warmth across Snowball's fur, a signature of shared solitude. Afternoon light turned the room golden. Snowball lay on the carpet again, paws stretched, head on the cool floor, eyes half closed. He traced patterns in the weave with his gaze. Each loop and knot became a tiny story, a hill, a river, a cloud. He felt his breathing slow, matching the clock's rhythm. In that half-dreaming state, he imagined his paw prints glowing where he had walked, tiny constellations trailing behind him. He thought of following them backward, step by step, to the moment before the helmet, before the blue light, back to simple puppy dreams. But even as he imagined it, he knew he could not. The world had opened, and he could not close it again. Outside, dusk crept in. The first stars appeared, shy pinpoints above the roofs. Snowball pressed his nose to the window pane. The glass was cool, carrying the smell of night. He stared at the stars and felt something stir, not ambition, not fear, but a soft ache, like longing without a name. He pawed at the pane once, leaving a smudge shaped like a small comet. In the reflection, his own eyes caught the starlight, and for a heartbeat it seemed as though the sky were looking back at him. He turned from the window and curled up on the rug. The clock ticked. The house breathed. Somewhere beneath it all, the basement still held its quiet machines, humming their secret chords. But here, in this room of warm carpet and fading light, Snowball drifted towards sleep, his mind a garden of colors and scents and gentle questions. Wonder wrapped him like a blanket. His tail twitched once, then stilled. As his eyelids closed, the images returned, paw prints filled with stars, patterns of sound, the boy's hand resting on his head, the scent of kindness like a trail through the dark. They were not urgent, not sharp, only soft invitations. He felt himself float between waking and dreaming, between who he had been and who he was becoming. And somewhere in that space, the world whispered again, not in words but in a feeling, everything is bigger, and you are safe to explore. Snowball sighed. The clock ticked on. Outside, the stars brightened. Inside, a puppy with a new mind slept on a warm carpet, paws curled like commas in an unfinished sentence, breathing slow, ready for whatever gentle discovery tomorrow might bring. The morning after his new dreams, Snowball woke with a sense of purpose that felt like sunlight caught inside his chest. The house was still quiet, the clock still ticking its soft syllables, but his paws tingled as though some invisible string were pulling them towards something new. He stretched on the warm carpet, nose pressed to its threads, then padded slowly to the kitchen. The boy's cereal bowl sat on the table, a spoon resting like a silver boat in a shallow sea. Snowball stared at it, then at the pencil lying nearby from last night's homework. He didn't know the word pencil, but its scent, cedar, graphite, a trace of sweat from the boy's fingers, seemed to carry a secret. He nudged it with his nose. The cylinder rolled, bumping against his paw. Instinct said chew, but something else said hold. He tried to grip it between his teeth in a new way, turning his head, pressing his paws together as he had seen the boy do with his hands. The pencil slipped, clattered to the floor. He tried again. A soft grunt escaped him. Not a bark, not a whine, something like a syllable. The sound startled him. His ears flicked back, then forward again. He pawed at the pencil and let out another sound, quieter, drawn out. It vibrated in his throat like a new note on a familiar instrument. For several mornings he practiced. When the family was away or napping, he would sit by the kitchen table, pencil between paws, pressing it clumsily against scrap paper pulled from the edge of the boy's notebook. His marks were crooked lines, like grass blown by wind, but each one filled him with a strange pride. Sometimes he would drag the paper to the boy's door and leave it there before retreating. The boy would find it later and smile, thinking the dog had simply tracked dirt. Snowball would watch from the hallway, tail wagging slowly, feeling a glow he could not name. Speech came in small huffs. He began to shape them without meaning to. A soft hex when the boy entered the room, a low when the tall one bent over the basement machines. They were not words yet, just the tremor of words forming, but with each sound his chest loosened, as though some weight were lifting. At night he would lie on the rug and practice in whispers, pressing his snout to the fabric to muffle the noise. Oh. The clock ticked beside him like a patient teacher. In between these attempts, he gave gifts. At first, they were simple: a sock, gently retrieved from the laundry and placed on the boy's pillow, a toy carried not for play, but for offering, a stray leaf fetched from the yard and laid at the foot of the couch. Each gift was a message he could not yet speak. I see you. I care. I'm trying. He would watch from the doorway as the boy discovered them. Sometimes there was confusion, sometimes laughter, sometimes just a pause and a glance toward the dog as if sensing something different. Each reaction fed a quiet joy inside Snowball's chest. One afternoon he found a fallen flower petal in the yard, pale pink with edges curling like a tiny ear. He carried it carefully inside, avoiding the urge to chew, and placed it on the kitchen counter where the tall one kept his coffee cup. The man returned, saw the petal, and for a moment his habitual frown softened. He touched it with one finger, then glanced at Snowball, a question flickering in his eyes. Snowball met his gaze and let out a single soft The man did not answer, but he reached down and brushed the dog's head before turning away. That brush of fingers felt like a whole sentence. The pencil practice continued. Snowball learned to steady it with one paw while nudging with his nose. His marks became loops instead of scratches, then spirals. He did not know letters but sensed their shapes, echoes of the glowing circles from the helmet night. He would stare at the loops and feel them hum. Once, by accident, he traced a line that curved like a heart. He stared at it, tail twitching, then nudged the paper toward the door again, a secret hope rising. The boy found it that evening and sat cross-legged on the floor, petting Snowball for a long time without speaking. The dog pressed his head into the boy's knee and sighed. In the evenings, when the house dimmed and shadows lengthened like soft rivers across the carpet, Snowball practiced stillness. He would sit near his gifts, the sock, the toy, the leaf, and wait. He noticed that when he was quiet, the humans grew quiet too, their steps slowing, their voices lowering. He began to understand that kindness was not only in action, but in presence. In the small way one heart steadies another, this realization felt like a new scent drifting into his nose, subtle and sweet. Sometimes he dreamed of holding a pencil perfectly, writing a word the boy could read. In the dream, the boy's eyes lit up, and he understood everything: the blue light, the hum, the gifts. They would sit together under the stars, no collar, no helmet, just a shared silence filled with meaning. Snowball would wake from these dreams and feel both happy and aching, tail curled tight around him like a question mark. He would press his paw to the carpet as if leaving a promise there. The tall one noticed changes too. He would glance up from his papers and find the dog staring at him with an expression not quite animal. One night he whispered, "What have I done?" to no one. Snowball tilted his head, catching the shape of regret, though not the word. He padded over, dropped a crumpled paper covered in loops at the man's feet, and rested his paw on the man's shoe. The man looked down, startled, then knelt and stayed there, hand on fur, as the machine in the basement hummed softly in the dark. For a moment, the room felt like a sanctuary. Days passed like gentle waves. Snowball's attempts at speech grew a little clearer, his gifts more deliberate, yet there was no urgency, only a steady unfolding. The house remained a world of warm carpet. Ticking clocks and distant stars glimpsed through the window at night. In that world, a small dog with a changing mind was learning the shape of kindness, not as a command, not as a trick, but as a language of its own. Each pencil mark, each soft sound, each humble offering was a letter in that new alphabet. He lay curled by the boy's bed one evening, watching the boy sleep. The boy's breath rose and fell like tides. Snowball pressed a paw against the floorboards, feeling the hum of the house, the slow heartbeat of time. He closed his eyes and let his own breath sink with the boy. In that shared rhythm, he felt a quiet pride, like a seed sprouting unseen in dark soil. It was not power, it was not a plan. It was simply growth, small and luminous, blooming in the hush between ticks of the clock. Outside, the stars watched over the roof. Inside, the puppy, with a pencil and a pocketful of small gifts, drifted towards sleep, his mind a tapestry of gentle loops and soft hopes. The night held him like a hand. Tomorrow he would try again, another sound, another mark, another quiet act, and in each one, something invisible but real would grow like a candlelight spreading from heart to heart in the darkness. Days folded gently into one another, like pages turned without a sound. Snowball's pencil loops had become a ritual, but soon his paws began reaching for more than paper. The helmet's echo still hummed faintly inside him, not loud, not insistent, just a quiet suggestion, a pulse of possibility under his skin. One morning, as dawn slid through the kitchen window in ribbons of pale gold, he found himself arranging crumbs from the boy's toast into shapes on the table. First a circle, then a star, then a crown so small it could rest on a fingertip. He stared at it, tail still, as though a memory had surfaced from some other life. The boy wandered in, rubbing his eyes. He paused at the sight of crumbs forming a pattern. "Weird dog," he murmured with a smile, patting Snowball's head before eating the toast that remained. But Snowball's gaze stayed on the crown, its tiny arches collapsing when the boy's elbow brushed the table. He did not whine. He simply memorized the shape, feeling an ache of longing behind his ribs, and padded back to the carpet. From that morning on, small structures began to appear wherever Snowball lingered. In the yard he would drag twigs into spirals, weaving blades of grass through them until they looked like green bracelets. On rainy afternoons he would nudge folded scraps of paper into the sink's trickle of water, watching them drift like paper boats toward the drain. In the evenings he stacked pebbles on the porch, balancing them 3 high, 4 high, like miniature towers waiting for some unseen traveler. Each creation was fragile, dissolving at the lightest touch, yet each one glowed inside him like a candle. He did not understand why he built them. They were not toys and not trophies. They felt like messages, though he could not yet speak them. When he placed a twig spiral near the boy's shoes, he heard, "I see your sadness." When he shaped a crown of grass beside the man's coffee cup, he meant, "You still hold a kind of light." The family never knew. They only noticed that the dog seemed busy, padding from room to room. nose down, tail swaying like a metronome. Snowball's powers, if they could be called that, were not flashes of strength, but delicate extensions of feeling. A nudge of empathy here, a tilt of intention there. He could steady a wobbling stack of pebbles with a breath, coax a paper boat to float longer by shaping its fold with his paw. These were not miracles, only quiet alignments, like a wind guiding a feather's fall. Yet in each act he felt the blue light return, softer now, like moonlight on fur. It was not about control, it was about listening to what wanted to be built. On one twilight evening, the yard smelled of rain and soil. Snowball gathered dandelion stems and bent them into a ring, pressing each one gently with his nose until they formed a perfect loop. In the center he placed a pebble shaped like a tiny heart. He left it on the doorstep and retreated to the shadows. The boy opened the door later, saw the small ring, and for a moment just stared. He didn't know why, but he picked it up carefully and carried it to his room, setting it on the windowsill beside a jar of marbles. Snowball watched from the hall, his tail tapping once against the wall, a silent applause. Inside his dreams the structures grew larger. He built whole gardens of tiny crowns, each glowing faintly, each pulsing with the warmth of someone he loved. He would wander among them, paws soft on moss, stars overhead like patient eyes. In these dream gardens he felt no hurry, no hunger, only a vast tenderness. Sometimes he imagined the boy walking beside him, touching the crowns one by one, understanding each message. He would wake with his paws curled as though still holding something fragile. The man noticed too, in his own distracted way, he would find patterns of screws arranged on his workbench after leaving it messy, or wires coiled into graceful shapes instead of knots. He never saw Snowball low it, but once he whispered, "Clever dog," and felt a pang of both pride and guilt. That night, Snowball carried a pebble tower to the basement stairs and left it there like a quiet reply. The man stepped over it carefully, eyes soft, and didn't sweep it away. Snowball's building became a meditation. He would sit for long stretches arranging crumbs, leaves, and bits of string. His breathing slowed, the clock ticked, and he would feel the room settle around him, the human's moods smoothing like ripples on water. In those moments he sensed that kindness itself had shape, not a grand cathedral but a collection of small, delicate forms. Sand castles at low tide, paper boats on a kitchen stream, crowns made of grass for no one to wear. One evening, as dusk pressed its cool fingers against the windows, Snowball built a crown directly around his own paw. He bent tiny twigs into a ring, wove in a few strands of the boy's hair fallen on the carpet, and sat there looking at it. The crown felt like a promise he could not yet keep, a word he could not yet speak. He closed his eyes and breathed, the hum of the basement machine echoing faintly in his chest. He imagined placing the crown on the boy's head, not to rule but to heal. In his mind the boy smiled, in his mind the stars blinked approval. Outside, the first real stars pricked through the deepening sky. Snowball padded to the window and pressed his nose to the glass. His reflection merged with the constellations. Behind him, on the carpet, his tiny crowns waited, fragile as soap bubbles, lasting just long enough to be seen. He wagged his tail once, a small wave to the night. He did not know where these acts would lead. He only knew they felt right, like breathing, like following a scent of hope. Each small creation was a way of saying, "I am here, I care. The world is bigger than it seems, but we can shape it gently." He lay down beside his latest crown, head resting just outside its loop, and let his eyes close. The carpet was warm, the clock was ticking, the stars were distant but watching. In the quiet he drifted towards sleep, paws twitching with the memory of building, of arranging, of caring. The garden of tiny crowns shimmered behind his eyelids, delicate, glowing, endless. Somewhere in that dream garden, the boy walked, and the man too, and maybe all those who had ever been kind without asking anything in return. Snowball sighed, tail curling like a comma, ready for whatever soft discovery tomorrow might bring. It began like a breeze moving through a closed room. Nothing to see, only a shift you could feel. Snowball's small acts had been private, his loops and crowns and paper boats dissolving quietly into the rhythms of the house. But now the hum inside him, that faint blue echo of the helmet, seemed to ripple outward. Others began to tilt their heads as he passed. Even before he barked or whined, something in his presence brushed their senses, like a whisper caught at the edge of hearing. The boy noticed first. He would be doing homework at the kitchen table when a feeling of calm settled over him, like a blanket draped across his shoulders. He began to talk to Snowball without thinking, not just sit or fetch, but half-formed thoughts about school, a friend he missed, a dream he couldn't explain. Snowball would sit at his feet, tail a slow pendulum, eyes bright but soft. He could not answer in words, yet his gaze seemed to hold the boy's worries, letting them loosen. Once, while the boy spoke, Snowball let out a low hum, the sound he used when building his crowns. The boy stopped mid-sentence, startled, then smiled faintly and stroked the dog's head. "You always get it," he whispered. Snowball pressed his paw against the boy's shoe, a silent promise. There was also the neighbor's child, a girl of about 8, who came by sometimes to feed her cat, a sleek grey creature named Myrtle. She was shy, often trailing behind her mother, eyes on the ground. One afternoon she found Snowball in the yard arranging leaves into a spiral. Instead of running, she crouched a few feet away, watching. He looked up and wagged his tail slowly, inviting but not pushing. She picked up a leaf, placed it beside his. Together, without words, they built a pattern on the grass, 2 circles touching at one point like a soft infinity sign. When it was done, she laughed quietly, a sound like a tiny bell, and whispered "thank you," though she didn't know why. From then on, she would linger a little longer each visit, bringing a leaf or a pebble to add to his shapes. Snowball sensed her loneliness and offered his stillness as a space where she could be less alone. Myrtle, the cat, too, began to change her posture around him. At first she kept her distance, tail flicking. But one evening, as the girl sat cross-legged on the porch with Snowball beside her, Myrtle padded up and curled into the girl's lap without hesitation. Snowball lowered his head, eyes half closed. A hush fell over the small gathering. Child, dog, cat, like a chord struck softly on a hidden instrument. The air felt fuller, the sunset warmer. Even the crickets seemed to time their chirps differently. The girl stroked Myrtle with one hand and Snowball with the other, her small body relaxing into a smile that reached her eyes. It was not magic, it was simply a new shape of safety. Inside the house, the tall man began to feel it as well. He would return from the basement late at night, shoulders heavy, and find Snowball waiting at the top of the stairs. The dog's presence no longer startled him. Instead, he felt a faint steadiness like a hand on his back. One evening he sat on the bottom step, head in his hands. Snowball descended, not with the exuberance of a pet, but with the quiet grace of a companion. He pressed his head under the man's arm. The man exhaled, long and shaky. "What are you?" he murmured, though he already knew the answer was the same as before, only more. Snowball gave a low woof, not a word, but something between comfort and reply. These small moments gathered like dew. The boys' homework nights became calmer. The neighbor's girl began to leave her hair unhidden under her hood. Myrtle stopped hissing at shadows. The man's sighs grew shorter, his gaze a little clearer. None of them could point to a reason, but they all felt a shift, a faint thread weaving them closer. Snowball, still unable to speak, sensed the threads like vibrations under his paws. Each heartbeat in the room became part of a quiet pattern, like stars arranged in a constellation only he could see. He started to hum more often. When the boy cried softly after a hard day, Snowball sat beside him and let a low tone rumble in his chest, a vibration the boy could feel through his palms. When the girl brought a pebble for their yard pattern, Snowball nudged it into place and gave a soft that made her giggle. When the man emerged from the basement, Snowball would walk with him to the kitchen, paws tapping in rhythm with the man's tired steps. These were not speeches but bridges, built from sound, touch and patience. At night, curled at the foot of the boy's bed, Snowball dreamed of walking with them all. The boy, the girl, the cat, even the man, across a field where tiny crowns bloomed like flowers. In the dream they each picked one and wore it without shame, no longer hiding their sadness. They looked at one another and simply understood. He would wake with his paw resting against the boy's ankle, a faint glow of contentment warming his chest. Snowball did not know if he was changing them or if they were changing with him. He only knew that the whispers inside him were becoming voices outside, not loud, not commanding, but real. Each bond felt like a new crown in his invisible garden, delicate and shining, built not of power but of empathy and longing. He wagged his tail once, slowly, as if sealing a vow. The clock ticked on. The house breathed. Somewhere above, the stars shifted in their silent paths, echoing a pattern only he could feel. Sleep came to him that night, like a tide sliding over sand. He had curled in the boy's room, paws warm against the carpet, head resting near the ticking clock. But behind his closed eyes, a new space began to open. Not quite dream, and not quite memory, a map unfolding from the quiet blue hum inside his chest. It was a place he had never walked, yet every step of it felt known. A city, but not like the ones the humans built. A city soft enough for paws. Streets stretched out in gentle curves rather than sharp angles, padded with moss and woven fibers, springy underfoot, so no claw would ache. Houses rose low and round like nests, walls built from smooth stones and braided reeds, warm to the touch. Windows glowed with a dim amber light, as if every home contained a hearth and a heartbeat. Between the houses ran shallow streams of clean water, where pups could splash and lap without fear. Along the banks grew grasses that smelled of milk and rain, carrying whispers of comfort into the air. In the center of the city lay a wide circle, not a square but a soft hollow lined with velvet moss. Here the dogs gathered at dusk, their bodies forming a living spiral. Above them a great canopy of cloth dyed the color of twilight, shifted gently in the breeze like a giant breathing lung. Tiny bells hung from its edges, chiming softly with each movement of air, a lullaby for whoever stood beneath. Snowball saw himself padding into the circle, not as a leader but as one among many, his crown of grass left at the threshold, so no paw would feel smaller than another. Beyond the circle rose the meeting halls, long, low buildings with open arches and starlit ceilings. No doors, no locks, only curtains of soft fabric moving like water. Inside, cushions lay scattered in loose constellations. Here the dogs would rest nose to nose, sharing warmth, sharing quiet thoughts that drifted like scents across the room. There were no speeches, no commands. Communication flowed as hums, touches, slow tilts of the head, a language of patience. In one corner a pup chased a floating ribbon of light projected from the ceiling, and older dogs watched, tails thumping softly, eyes filled with the same glow. He wandered farther in his vision. There were gardens where bones were not buried but planted like seeds, sprouting into pale blossoms shaped like paws. There were bridges made of woven reeds, arching over shallow pools, each bridge etched with faint symbols of kindness, a paw print, a heart, a spiral. There were hills outside the city where dogs could run at dawn, dew shining on their fur like 1,000 small stars, and then return to the soft streets to sleep under the gentle shade of willow-like trees. Everything breathed safety. Even the wind moved as if it were careful not to wake the resting. Snowball padded down a path lined with lanterns, shaped like moons. At each bend he saw another vision, a pup being guided across a stream by an older dog, two strangers meeting nose to nose and walking on together, a quiet room where a sick dog lay on cushions, and others curled around him, sharing warmth until the last breath passed without fear. It was not a utopia built of glass and towers. It was an impossible but tender blueprint, fragile as a paper boat yet somehow floating. He could feel in his chest that this city was built, not from power, but from the same impulse that had shaped his tiny crowns. Empathy made into place. Each padded street, each starlit hall, was a gesture, care extended outward, no fences, no shouting, only spaces designed for listening. In the dream he paused at a fountain shaped like a paw print. Water rose and fell in slow arcs catching the starlight. He lowered his head to drink, and tasted not water, but a flavor of belonging, cool and deep. The boy was there too, somewhere at the edge of the vision, walking slowly with bare feet on the mossy street. Myrtle, the cat, followed at a polite distance, tail curled like a question mark. The shy girl held a lantern. Even the tall man stood beneath a willow, shoulders eased. They did not speak, but their faces were soft, their eyes reflecting the same quiet wonder. Snowball felt no need to lead them. He simply walked among them, his tail swaying like a slow metronome, as if to say, "Here is a place where all can rest." He sensed the city was unfinished. Whole districts hovered like sketches waiting for a paw to trace them in. Bridges led to blank spaces of fog, buildings flickered between shapes. Yet instead of frustration he felt a gentle invitation, as if the city were asking not to be built alone, but with every creature's kindness added piece by piece. He thought of the girls' leaf circles, the boys' laughter, the man's softened sighs. Their small acts might be stones in the foundation, invisible but essential. The vision shifted again. He stood at the edge of the city, looking back. From this height, the streets formed a spiral like the spider's web he had once watched on the ceiling. At its center glowed a light, not blue but soft gold, pulsing like a heart. It was not his light alone, it belonged to every paw that would walk there. Snowball lowered his head, a tremor of humility passing through him. This was not a kingdom to rule. It was a resting place to keep safe. A breeze moved across his fur. Bells chimed from the canopy. Stars arched overhead like witnesses. He closed his eyes and felt the whole city breathe with him. Padded streets inhaling, starlit halls exhaling, water trickling like a whisper that had at last become a voice. He knew it was only a dream, a blueprint folded into his new mind, yet it filled him with the same soft ache he felt when building his fragile crones, an ache that was not pain, but longing turned outward. When he opened his eyes, he was back on the warm carpet of the boys' room. The clock ticked, moonlight slanted through the window, painting pale paths on the floor. His paw rested where the dream's moss had been. He wagged his tail once slowly, a silent promise to hold the vision close. Around him the house slept, the boy breathing steadily. Myrtle curled at the girl's feet in some other room, the man perhaps dozing in a chair. Snowball laid his head down, eyes half closed, the city of gentle dogs still shimmering behind his lids like an unfinished constellation. Outside, the real stars burned quietly, distant yet watching. Inside, a small dog with a growing heart drifted towards sleep, carrying an impossible but tender blueprint within him, a city soft enough for paws, where every creature might find a place to rest. Night had deepened to the kind of darkness that feels like velvet pressed gently against the windows. The boy was asleep, the girl gone home, Myrtle curled somewhere in a warm coil of fur. Only the clock's soft pulse marked time, a quiet heartbeat in the walls. Snowball lay awake on the carpet, eyes half open, the dream of the gentle city still echoing behind them. For the first time the echo felt heavy, not like a ribbon, but like a stone carried in his chest. Leadership, though he did not yet know the word, had a taste, cool metal, faintly bitter, like water drawn from deep pipes. He rose, paused soundless, and padded down the hallway. The house's shadows stretched long, like tired thoughts. He moved past the boy's door, past the photographs on the wall, until he reached the porch. Outside, the street was empty. Lamps glowed at regular intervals. Small suns holding back the dark, their cones of light overlapped like circles on a map, and Snowball stepped from one to the next, of circle a brief island of glow. His claws clicked softly on the pavement, a muted metronome to his wandering. He thought of the girl's shy smile when they built their spirals. He thought of Myrtle curling into her lap without fear. He thought of the tall man's sighs easing under his touch, of the boy's head resting heavier on his knee during homework nights. These were the threads he had been weaving, without plan, just impulse. But tonight, under the lamps, he felt the threads pull back at him, each one a small tug. Every kindness he offered created a tiny expectation, not of power, but of presence. He was becoming something to them, and something in that becoming pressed against his ribs like an invisible hand. The lamps buzzed faintly. Moths turned slow circles in their glow. Snowball stopped beneath one and sat, head tilted up. The light made his fur silver, each hair outlined, but inside he felt loot. He could not tell them what he saw, could not invite them into the city of gentle dogs except through gestures and gifts. They saw only the shapes, never the map behind them. That distance, once just a quiet ache, now felt like a corridor stretching away, lined with doors he could not open. He walked on. The street smelled of rain not yet fallen. A paper cup rolled lazily against the curb. Somewhere a sprinkler clicked on in a yard, a lonely rhythm. Snowball listened to all it the way he had once listened to the refrigerator's hum. Patterns everywhere, but the patterns no longer thrilled him. They weighted him. Freedom for his kind would not be given, it would be built. And building meant standing alone at the edge of the blueprint, paws dirty, eyes lifted to a sky no one else could see. He paused at the park's low gate, the one where he and the boy had once played. Beyond it, the grass lay dark, dew forming like a million small stars. He stepped inside and padded to the swing set. The chains creaked in the breeze. He pressed his paw to the cold metal seat, remembering the boy sitting there, legs pumping, calling his name. He had always been a companion, a listener, a gatherer of crumbs and gifts. Now the echo inside him whispered a different role, one he had not sought. It asked him to imagine a path ahead of his paws with no one walking beside him. He sat under another lamp at the edge of the park. Its glow spilled over his back like water. His tail lay still. He tried to picture the city again, but the vision flickered, padded streets descending into mist, starlit halls collapsing into dark. He realized the blueprint could not be held alone, but no one else yet carried it. That gap felt like a hollow between his ribs. He lowered his head and breathed slow and steady, as he had learned to do when calming the boy. The breath steadied him, but did not fill the hollow. From somewhere beyond the park, a dog barked, a common, simple bark. Snowball listened. The sound was rough, but honest. He envied it. He tried to answer, but only a low hum rose from his throat, a sound of neither play nor command, just being. The hum hung in the night air like a thread of smoke, then faded. The other dog barked once more, then fell silent. The night closed around them both. He rose and began to walk home, each lamp's circle of light marking a small station of solitude. He thought of freedom, the word forming dimly at the edge of his new mind. Freedom was a soft field, but also a long road. It meant pause that could roam, but also pause that could not always rest. It meant carrying the scent of others' hopes even when they were asleep. Under the last lamp before the porch he stopped and looked back. The street stretched empty, moths circling, shadows soft. He felt both small and vast, like a drop of rain, thinking about the ocean. Inside, the house was still. He padded to the boy's room and lay down at the foot of the bed. The boy stirred, murmured in sleep, reached out a hand without waking. Snowball touched his nose to the fingers, a silent reassurance. In that brief contact, the hollow inside him softened a little. Leadership might be lonely, but it did not have to be loveless. He curled into himself, tail over paws, listening to the clock, tick, tick, each sound an anchor in the dark. As his eyes drifted shut, the city of gentle dogs returned, faint but persistent. He saw its mossy streets and starlit halls, but now he saw himself not at its center, but at its edge, watching others enter. He felt the ache again, but also a strange peace, as if the blueprint was less a burden than a gift to hold until others were ready. The weight of understanding pressed on him, but beneath it flowed the same quiet current that had carried him this far. Empathy and longing, small and steady, like paws moving under quiet lamps toward a horizon that waited patiently. He sighed, a sound between breath and hum. Outside, the lamps hummed their insect song. Inside, a puppy with a growing mind lay awake a little longer, thinking of freedom and its cost, then finally letting sleep come like a slow tide, carrying his thoughts out to a sea of stars where they could rest until morning. Late one afternoon, when the house was quiet enough to hear dust settle, Snowball padded down the narrow hallway that led to the storage room. He hadn't been there since he was very small. The door stood ajar, a thin blade of light spilling across the floorboards. Beyond it drifted the scent of cedar, old fabric, and a sweetness like forgotten treats. He stepped through softly, as though entering a dream. The room was dim, but gentle, walls lined with boxes and shelves, everything softened by a thin coat of dust. A rocking chair sat in one corner, its curved runners etched with scratches like pale ripples. Above it hung a mobile of paper moons, faded now to ivory, still turning slowly from a breath of unseen air. Snowball's paws sank into an old rug patterned with clouds. Each step stirred a faint scent of puppyhood. He felt his tail lower and his ears tilt back. The air itself seemed to hum with lullabies. On a low hook by the door hung his first collar, tiny, frayed at the edges, a dull silver tag engraved with a name he had only half understood when he wore it. It swung slightly as he approached, the tag clicking against the wall with a sound like a distant bell. He nudged it with his nose. The metal was cool, carrying memories of walks under morning mist, of naps on warm laps, of a world that had felt small and complete. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was that puppy again, seeing only the boy's shoes and the path ahead. Around the collar lay a scatter of old toys, a rubber ball softened with age, a rope chewed to fuzz, a squeaker long silent but still shaped like a bone. Each object held a story his new mind could now read in layers. The first time he'd carried the ball back clumsily, the afternoons he'd tugged the rope under the boy's laughter, the nights he'd curled up with the squeaker like a talisman. He nosed them gently, one by one, and the room seemed to sway with memory, each toy a note in a forgotten melody. On a shelf above the toys sat a small tin box. He pushed it down with a paw until it landed with a muffled thump. The lid popped open and out slid a faded photograph, the boy holding him as a tiny bundle, eyes bright, hair sticking up. Behind them, the tall man stood at the kitchen counter, half-smile hidden in his beard. Snowball stared at the picture, tail still. The smell of the paper was old dust and sunlight. He pressed his paw against it as if to steady himself. A music box sat nearby, shaped like a house. He nudged the key, and it turned with a dry squeak. Then a tune began, faint, off-key, but still sweet. The notes drifted, drift the room like drifting feathers. Snowball lay down on the rug, resting his head between his paws. The melody wrapped around him, slow and circling, as if time itself were rocking him gently. He breathed in the smell of cedar and fabric and old fur. His heart beat slower. He thought of the crowns he had built, of the paper boats, of the spirals of leaves. He thought of the boys' quiet smiles, the girls' shy gifts, the man's softened gaze. All of it had begun here, in this small collar, this room of toys. He had been a puppy chasing simple joys, not a creature carrying blueprints. A tremor passed through his chest. Not regret exactly, but the ache of growing past a shell you once called home. The music box wound down. The tune faltered, then stopped. In the hush that followed, he heard the tick of a distant clock, the house's slow breathing. He rose and walked to the collar again, pressing his nose to the tag. For a moment he imagined slipping it back on, shrinking back into that time, but even as he pictured it, he knew he could not. His paws were larger now, his mind too full of voices. The collar belonged to a version of him who had not yet heard the hum under the basement floor. He lifted the collar from the hook with his teeth and carried it to the center of the rug. There he placed it gently among the toys, as though returning a crown to its stand. He sat back, tail curled around his paws, and stared at the little circle of objects. Collar, ball, rope, squeaker, photograph. Together they formed a ring like the ones he had built outside, a soft pattern of beginnings. He lowered his head and let a low hum rise from his throat. It was not a word, but it filled the room like a blessing. Sunlight shifted through the window, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Snowball watched them drift and thought of his city of gentle dogs, of mossy streets and starlit halls. He realized now that every street, every hall, had been seeded by these small things. The ball, the rope, the collar. Even the way he walked between the lamps at night echoed the way he had once trotted after the boy's footstep. The blueprint was not separate from his past. It grew out of it like a vine from old soil. He stood, circled once on the rug, then lay down again, resting his head just inside the ring of toys. The scent of each object mingled into a single smell, safety. He let his eyes souse. In the darkness behind his lids, the toys became stars. The collar became a soft moon. The photograph became a door opening onto a field. He saw himself walking there, not alone, but carrying all the small acts that had built him. He felt both smaller and larger at once, a creature of beginnings and of becoming. The house creaked softly. Somewhere a door shut. The air smelled of evening now, cool and quiet. Snowball breathed in, breathed out. The room of old toys held him like a cradle. He did not feel trapped by the past. He felt rooted, like a tree leaning toward a new sky. A lullaby without words drifted through his mind. The sound of the music box, the boy's laugh, the girl's whisper, the man's sigh, all braided together. He wagged his tail once, a slow pulse of gratitude, and let sleep fold around him like a blanket. It began without a sound. No banners, no shouts, no clash of anything against anything, just a slow gathering, like fog at dawn or dew on grass. Snowball was sitting in the yard one evening, arranging fallen leaves into a loose spiral, while the boy sketched nearby, when a stray dog padded up from the street. It stopped at the edge of the lawn, head tilted, eyes reflecting the last of the sunlight. Snowball looked up, nose twitching. He didn't beckon, didn't bark. He simply held the gaze, and after a moment the stray stepped closer and sat down opposite him, paws mirroring his. Another came the next night, a brown pup with ears too big for its head, padding in from an alley. Then two more, older and slower, moving like shadows. Each time, Snowball did the same thing. He paused, lifted his head, let a low hum rise in his chest, and returned to his quiet building. Spirals of twigs, loops of string, crowns of grass. The newcomers would watch for a while, then begin to nose leaves into place beside him, paws tapping softly on the earth as if keeping time with some invisible rhythm. Soon the yard itself felt larger, as though the fences had dissolved. Dogs appeared at dusk from blocks away, from porches and garages and backyards, slipping through gaps in fences, crossing streets with cautious grace. They came singly, then in pairs, then in small groups, each one drawn, not by command, but by a sense of something unfolding. Their eyes shone in the dim light, not fierce but clear, like wet stones. Their paws made a soft drumming on the grass, a heartbeat that swelled as night deepened. Snowball did not stand at the center like a general. He moved among them like a current in water, head low, tail swaying, his hum blending with the wind through the trees. Sometimes he placed a pebble in the spiral, sometimes another dog would place one, sometimes a pup would lie down and simply watch. The pattern grew, loops inside loops, spirals turning outward. It was not a camp, it was not a crowd, it was a tide at night, inevitable, silent, slow. The boy noticed first. He sat on the porch steps, blanket around his shoulders, watching as his dog became the quiet heart of something he could not name. He did not feel fear, he felt a hush, like standing under a sky full of stars. The shy neighbor girl came too, clutching Myrtle the cat, her eyes wide. Myrtle, usually restless, stayed still in her arms, tail curled neatly, eyes following the shapes forming on the lawn. Even the tall man stood at the window, coffee forgotten, one hand pressed against the glass, his face caught between awe and regret. Snowball lifted his head once and met the man's gaze. In that look was no challenge, only a steady question. "Do you see now?" The man blinked but did not turn away. Outside, the gathering continued. Dogs of every size and color formed loose circles, their breathing sinking until it sounded like waves rolling in. The smell of fur and earth rose into the cooling air. No one barked, no one broke the rhythm. Even the crickets seemed to hold their song. He began to walk then, not as a signal, but as a simple motion. From the center of the spiral, he padded toward the street, paws light, tail low. The nearest dogs followed, then the ones find them. The hum of movement, spreading outward like a ripple, across a pond. The boy rose to his feet without realizing, the girl clutching his hand. Now, Myrtle leaping softly to the ground and falling in beside them. The man stepped out onto the porch. For a moment it felt as though the whole block were breathing in time. They moved through the neighborhood under quiet lamps, the street empty of cars, moths circling the glow above. Paws tapped softly on asphalt, claws clicking faintly, a soft percussion that echoed against houses like a secret lullaby. Curtains shifted as humans peered out, faces pale in the light. None of them shouted. Some opened their doors and simply watched, a faint smile or a tear at the corner of an eye as the procession passed. It was not a march, it was not a wattage, it was a slow exhalation of something long held inside. Snowball did not look back to count them. He knew by the change in the air, thicker, warmer, like a blanket unfolding, that more and more were joining. He felt the weight of their hope on his fur, but also their trust, which was lighter than he had feared. His mind did not fill with plans or slogans. It filled with images, moss under paws, soft halls, lit by stars, bridges woven from reeds. The city of gentle dogs unrolled behind his eyes, as clearly as the street before him. He did not need to describe it. They were walking through its doorway already, one padded step at a time. At an intersection, he paused under a lamp. The group slowed behind him, paws shuffling softly. He raised his head and let a hum rise from his throat. Low, steady, like a bell heard from far away. The sound drifted over them and out into the night. For a moment no one moved, then the hum was answered, not in unison, but in scattered notes, soft wafts and low murmurs, a chorus forming itself. The street filled with a music no human language could hold, a sound of pause and breath and patience. The boy pressed his hand to his chest. The girl closed her eyes. The man whispered something no one heard. Snowball lowered his head and began walking again. The tide followed. Lamps cast their cones of light like stepping stones across the dark. Shadows of dogs stretched long on the pavement, overlapping, merging, fading. The smell of night flowers rose from gardens. The hum of the basement machine, far away now, seemed to echo in his bones. He felt the blueprint inside him settle, no longer a weight, but a rhythm. Leadership did not have to be a crown on his head. It could be a path under his paws. By the time they reached the edge of the park, the street behind them looked empty again, as though nothing had passed. But the air was different, softer, expectant, like a room after a song. Snowball stopped and sat, tail curling around his paws. The others settled too, forming a loose circle without instruction. Above them the stars watched, steady and silent. The boy knelt, the girl beside him, myrtle between her hands. The man stood at the edge, shoulders lowered, eyes reflecting starlight. No one spoke. Snowball closed his eyes. He felt their breathing blend with his, felt the soft tide rise and fall. It was not an army, it was not a crowd. It was a field of hearts leaning toward the same quiet dream. Inevitability, he realized, could be tender. A movement could be as soft as paws on moss, as steady as water shaping stone. He lowered his head, and the circle breathed out with him, a single slow sigh under the lamps, the night itself holding them like a cradle. Dawn arrived like a pale hush poured across the rooftops. The procession of paws that had filled the streets the night before was gone now, scattered back to alleys, porches, gardens, and hidden corners. Only Snowball remained on the path leading home, fur brushed with dew, eyes carrying a glow that felt softer than moonlight. He walked slowly, each step lighter than it had been, as though the city he carried inside him had finally exhaled. The house stood ahead, windows still dim, curtains drawn against the new day. He paused at the edge of the yard, nose lifting to catch familiar scents: warm bread from a neighbor's kitchen, damp soil, the hedge, the faintest thread of coffee from inside. His tail gave a small, uncertain wag. This was where everything had begun. The boy's laughter, the basement hum, the collar, the first loops of pencil marks. For a heartbeat he almost turned away, afraid of being too changed to belong. But something deeper than thought guided him forward, paws sinking into grass that still held the shapes of their old games. The door was open a crack. Inside, the hallway glowed with that soft grey light houses hold before anyone wakes. Snowball padded across the threshold without a sound. The smell of the carpet rose to meet him, warm and worn, full of crumbs of memory. He followed it to the kitchen, where the tall man sat at the table, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on nothing. He looked smaller in the dimness, the usual crease in his brow smoothed by exhaustion. Beside his cup of coffee sat the crown of grass. Snowball had left days ago, still green at its edges. Snowball stopped just inside the doorway. The man did not move at first. Then he lifted his head, and their eyes met across the room. In that moment, no words were possible. The man's gaze held questions and apologies and a flicker of wonder. Snowball's gaze held no blame, only the quiet weight of what had passed between them. He took a few steps closer, paws muffled on the linoleum, until he was within reach. The man's hand hesitated in the air, then lowered slowly to the dog's head. His palm rested there, warm and heavy, as it had when Snowball was a puppy. Snowball leaned into it, eyes closing, a low sigh escaping his chest. He couldn't name the feeling, but he knew it was home. The blue echo inside him softened to gold, and for a heartbeat he felt as if they were breathing through the same lungs. their hearts turning like two slow wheels in the same current. No apology was spoken, no promise was made. The man's thumb traced the edge of Snowball's ear, as though reading the language there. Snowball pressed his nose against the man's knee and stayed still, letting the touch sink into him like warmth into cold fur. Around them the house creaked softly, the clock ticked its patient rhythm, and a thin sunbeam slid across the floor, lighting the collar hanging on the hook. The air smelled of coffee, old wood, and the faint sweetness of grass crowns. After a while, Snowball pulled back, not out of rejection but of release. He walked to the hook where his first collar still hung, and touched it with his nose. Then he turned to the man, tail swaying once. A silent gesture. "I've carried this with me, and now I'm giving it back." The man stood and removed the collar gently. For a moment he held it as if weighing it, then set it on the table beside the crown of grass. He looked at Snowball again, his face softer than it had been in years. Snowball padded to the living room and lay down on the warm carpet where he had once practiced his pencil loops. He rested his head on his paws and let his eyes half close. The man followed and sat on the floor a few feet away, back against the couch. No one spoke. The boy still slept upstairs. The girl and Myrtle were elsewhere. The city of gentle dogs drifted like a dream behind Snowball's eyelids. Here there was only a man and a dog, and the faint sound of a clock, steady as breath. Snowball felt the tension in his chest ease, not gone but gentled. Leadership had been lonely, but it had also led him back to this, a quiet room, a familiar scent, a hand that had once fitted a collar around his neck. He realized he could let go of holding everything at once. The blueprint of mossy streets and starlit halls could live inside him without making him heavier. He could rest here for a while, and in resting, share that rest with others. He closed his eyes fully now. The man stayed seated, watching him with a look, halfway between recognition and wonder, as though seeing the puppy he had once held and the creature he had become overlapping, like two transparent images. The sunbeam widened across the carpet, touching both of them. Snowball's breathing slowed until it matched the clock's tick. In his mind, the city's padded streets curled inward like a sleeping animal. He felt his tail twitch once, then still. Somewhere above, the boy turned in his sleep. The house's walls seemed to sigh. Snowball pressed his paws against the carpet and felt the hum of life under it. Not machines this time, but something older and quieter. He didn't need to name it. He only needed to breathe. The man's hand hovered once more, then fell gently onto his back, a weight without demand. Snowball leaned into it. The moment held. He couldn't name the feeling, but he knew it was home. Morning came pale and silver, spilling across the floors like a quiet tide. Snowball lay on the carpet near the table, where his first collar and grass crown rested side by side. He watched the dust drift in the slant of light and felt, for the first time in many nights, a stillness inside him. The city of gentle dogs had filled his dreams again, but this time it was fading at the edges, its streets dissolving like mist above warm ground. The padded avenues, the starlit halls, even the fountains shaped like paws blurred into soft shapes, as though someone were wiping chalk from a board. Yet instead of panic, he felt a calm ache, a tenderness, as though he was saying goodbye to something that had done its work. He rose slowly, paws pressing into the rug's weave. The boy had left for school. The house was hushed except for the slow breathing of the tall man in the kitchen. Snowball padded to the back door and nosed it open. The yard stretched out, damp from night rain, its grass dotted with the remnants of his small crowns. Twigs had scattered, paper boats had melted into pulp, spirals of leaves had collapsed back into the soil. The sight should have felt like loss, but instead it felt like the earth taking a deep breath, absorbing what had been offered. He stepped into the grass, inhaling the scent of wet soil. Each paw print filled with water as he moved. tiny mirrors reflecting the sky. He paused by the porch where he had first imagined the gathering of odds. The memory came gently. The shy girl placing a leaf beside him, Myrtle curling into her lap, the boy standing silent, the man watching from the window. Those nights had been like slow stars rising, one after another. Now, under daylight, the stars had set. What remained was a softer glow inside him, less like a blueprint, more like a pulse. Snowball walked toward the park. Along the way he passed dogs he had seen in the gatherings. They trotted in the opposite direction, back to their porches, their yards, their families. Each one glanced at him, but did not follow. Some dipped their heads in a quiet acknowledgement, then padded on. Their eyes were still bright, but their steps were lighter now, unburdened. He felt no sting at their leaving. Instead, he felt a quiet pride, like a teacher watching pupils walk out into their own morning. In the park, dew clung to the swings, and the grass bent under its own weight. Snowball climbed the small hill at the center and sat, looking out. The lamps were off now. The path was empty. He closed his eyes and tried to summon the city again, but only fragments appeared. A mossy street, a curtain moving in a starlit hall, a bridge of reeds arching over fog. He let them drift past without grasping. Power, he realized, could build a place, but it could not keep a heart from changing. Love, small and unspoken, had been the true mortar of every soft structure he had imagined, and love was not his to hold. It moved where it was needed. He lowered his head and began to hum, the low tone that had once gathered them. The sound drifted over the empty park, carrying no summons, only a farewell. A breeze lifted, moving through the trees with a sound like slow applause. He thought of the boy, of the girl, of Myrtle, of the tall man, each of them carrying a piece of what they had shared, whether they knew it or not. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the city of gentle dogs would never exist as moss and stone, but would live as a tenderness inside many hearts, opening quietly in moments of kindness. Snowball rose and padded down the hill. He stopped by the old gate and looked back once more. The park seemed the same as when he had first played fetch there, only his seeing had changed. He felt the weight of the collar and the crown left on the kitchen table, even though they were miles behind him. He felt, too, the lightness of having laid them down. The two feelings balanced each other like breath in and breath out. On the way home, he moved slower, noticing small things: a feather caught in a bush, a child's chalk drawing on the sidewalk fading in the sun, the scent of rain on stone. Each was a crown of its own, tiny and transient. He touched his nose to the chalk drawing and left a faint smudge of fur against it, a mark so small it would vanish by evening. That was all right. Not everything needed to last to be real. Back at the house, the door was still open a crack. He stepped inside and found the man sitting at the table, eyes on the collar and crown, without a word. Snowball walked to his side and pressed his head against the man's knee. The man's hand rested on his back, not heavy now, not questioning, just there. They stayed like that as the clock ticked. As sunlight inched across the floor. No declarations, no endings, only a soft presence filling the room. Snowball lay down at the man's feet and closed his eyes. The city behind his eyelids faded fully now, but in its place bloomed a quiet warmth, like a hearth fire that never needed tending. He thought of padded streets and starlit halls, not as places to be built, but as ways of being carried. He thought of his small gifts, his soft hums, his paper boats and grass crowns. He thought of the boy's sighs easing, the girl's shy hands arranging leaves, Myrtle's tail curling in calm arcs. These were his kingdom, and dismantling it was not loss, but completion. He exhaled slowly, a breath that felt like laying down a burden. In the room's hush, the clock ticked on, steady and patient. Snowball felt the man's fingers stroke his fur, heard the house's familiar creaks, smelled the faint sweetness of coffee cooling on the table, all of it folded around him like a blanket. He wagged his tail once, slow and small, and let his body sink into the carpet. Power had built a dream. Love had built a life. And life, he understood now, would go on without needing him to hold it all. He did not need to be the center. He only needed to be here, breathing. He closed his eyes fully and drifted, the mist of his grand plans dissolving into a soft, endless morning. Night had settled like a soft cloak over the fields. Snowball padded through the tall grass, each step quiet, the damp stalks brushing against his fur. The air smelled of earth and dew, faintly sweet and infinitely calm. Above, stars sprinkled the sky in gentle clusters, not blazing but steady, like the watchful eyes of friends who had always been there. The moon hung low, pale as milk, and cast a silvery path over the meadow, inviting him to follow without hurry. He found a small rise where the grass bent in gentle waves, and he sat, paws tucked under him. Around him, the world had returned to its natural rhythm. Fireflies blinked lazily in the distance, and the whisper of wind through the stalks sounded like a lullaby he had always known. In this place, no city of gentle dogs pressed on the horizon. No streets of padded stone demanded his care. Only the quiet, the stars, the soft pulse of life around him. Snowball's ears twitched at distant sounds, the soft breathing of sleeping children in nearby houses, the rustle of a fox in the woods, the hum of insects in the grass. Each sound was a note in a slow, unending song, one that did not require his attention to remain beautiful. He realized that the world had always carried its music, its pattern, even before he had understood how to listen. His role was not to direct it, but to be present within it, a small piece of the melody. He closed his eyes briefly, thinking of the boy who had once placed leaves in his path, of the girl who had whispered secrets into his ears, of myrtle curling against the warmth of the fireplace. And though those moments had passed, they lived on in the quiet folds of memory, soft echoes that would travel in small ways through the nights and mornings of those he had loved. He had been part of something larger than himself, and now it could go on without him. That was a relief, not sorrow. Snowball lifted his head and sniffed the cool air, noticing patterns he had never attended to before. The drift of clouds across the moon, the shimmer of dew on each blade of grass, the way the stars seemed to echo one another in the night sky. He imagined that each pattern was a tiny dream, a whisper of possibility moving through the world. And perhaps, he thought, if he listened closely enough, he could hear the echoes of other beings dreaming too. Small, careful dreams that needed no guidance, only space to grow. A soft breeze moved through the meadow, and Snowball's fur shivered in the night. He felt the pulse of life under his paws, the heart of the earth steady and sure. Somewhere nearby a rabbit stirred, then settled, a bird shifted in its nest. Even the distant sound of a train far beyond the hills hummed like a low chord in the background of the world. Snowball let each sound wash over him, folding them into his being without thought or worry. This was enough. This had always been enough. He stretched his legs and yawned, long and slow, letting the tension of long nights drift away. In the distance, clouds rolled lazily across the horizon, pale shapes drifting against the dark sky. Snowball imagined them carrying dreams, tiny, luminous thoughts of those he had loved, of those who had touched his life, of those yet to come. The clouds would move, and the dreams would shift with them, passing gently over fields and forests, across rooftops into the hearts of others. He could see them, but not grasp them. That was the way of all dreams. Snowball lay down in the grass, curling his tail around his body. Above him, the stars winked slowly, rhythmic and patient. The world seemed to fold itself around him, a cocoon of quiet warmth. Somewhere beyond the meadow, dogs he had known in the city, and dogs he had never met, slept beneath the same stars. Their dreams wove in threads of light, invisible but certain, as delicate as whispers. Snowball closed his eyes, letting the sense of continuity fill him. He thought, fleetingly, of the city he had imagined, of the halls he had built, of the streets that had shimmered under starlight in his mind. None of them remained, and yet, in a subtle way, they had not disappeared. They had become part of the rhythm of the world, a pulse that moved quietly through hearts, paw prints left in memory rather than stone. His legacy was not grand or visible. It was small, soft, enduring. He had been a presence, and that was enough. A moth brushed his nose, and he watched it float lazily into the night. Snowball's ears twitched at the soft rustle of leaves. Every movement, every quiet sound, seemed magnified in the hush of the meadow. The night carried a promise that all things would rest, and in rest they would continue. Dreams were not held by hands, nor were they bound by plans. They flowed, invisible but real, and he was part of that flow. His work, his plans, his city, his crowns, all had become whispers in the wind, soft and eternal. Snowball pressed his nose into the grass and felt the cool soil beneath him. Above, the stars blinked, a quiet rhythm that mirrored the slow beating of his heart. Clouds passed, carrying faint shapes of distant mountains, of remembered friends, of little acts of kindness folded into their folds, and in the quiet he sensed the weightlessness of being fully at home, neither commanding nor following, simply present. The night deepened, and the meadow seemed to breathe with him. He imagined other beings, sleeping beneath other stars, their dreams forming delicate threads, weaving through the world. Perhaps they, too, would leave small gifts, gestures of care, or quiet acts of love. Perhaps those threads would brush against one another, unseen but significant, like echoes of his own life repeating endlessly. Snowball curled further, tail tucked, ears resting softly against the ground. The stars above him blinked once, then twice, and a cloud drifted across the moon, painting the meadow in shifting silver. Soft, looping thoughts filled him. Dreams, clouds, whispers, and sleep. Dreams, clouds, whispers, sleep. He could not name them all, nor did he need to. They existed, they carried on, they shimmered quietly across the night. And so Snowball slept, wrapped in the gentle arms of the meadow beneath the endless sky. Around him, the world breathed, alive in subtle rhythms, and he was part of it, a single note in an infinite lullaby. The dreams, the clouds, the whispers moved on, and he, too, drifted, softly, gently, fully home. Snowball wandered through a corridor of light, though there was no door, no wall, only a soft, flowing passage that seemed to hum with memories. Each step carried him farther and closer at once, as if time had folded in gentle loops, shapes, shimmered in the glow. The boy who had left leaves along the path, the girl who had whispered secrets, the small kittens who had curled around him in warmth. Each figure was bright, soft-edged, and glowing just enough to be familiar without startling. He paused to sniff the air, carrying hints of past meals, grassy fields, and the quiet of shared nights. Every memory he touched hummed lightly, like a note struck on a long-forgotten bell. He did not reach for them. They reached for him. There was no urgency, no need to hold anything, only the gentle recognition that all he had ever loved was still with him, still moving in subtle ways across the corridors of thought. In the distance he could see glimpses of the city he had once dreamed of, streets paved with padded stone, starlit meeting halls, gardens of tiny crowns. They shimmered faintly like reflections in a pond, soft and impossible. He realized that even if the structures had dissolved in the waking world, their echoes remained in the hearts of those who had felt them. That was the quiet magic of existence, impermanent, yes, yet persistent, like breath moving in rhythm with the universe. Snowball brushed past a shimmering archway, and the scent of warm carpets and ticking clocks drifted through the corridor. He paused there, letting the comfort settle in him like soft sunlight. The distant stars of his old meadow shone faintly through the glowing ceiling, blinking gently in recognition. Each step forward carried him through a kaleidoscope of memories, paw prints in sand, collars left behind, small gifts placed quietly by hands, too small to know the weight of generosity. He noticed patterns now. The subtle repetition of kindness, the way small acts stretched beyond the moment, threading into the lives of others. One soft nuzzle here, one wagging tail there, a whispered breath of a Dundin, each echo traveled farther than he could imagine. The corridor seemed alive with these traces, bending and arching around him like gentle vines, and he realized that he had never been alone. He had always been surrounded by a network of soft hearts, each connected through the tender currents of care. Snowball moved along, pausing occasionally to sniff, to watch, to simply exist. Each flicker of memory was a tiny sun, illuminating the quiet corners of his mind. Faces, voices, scents and touches shimmered in slow rotation, each one a note in a lullaby too intricate for words. He felt no longing to possess these moments again. He only felt the soft joy of recognition. They were here, they were real, they were part of him. And then he understood. The corridor was infinite, but not empty. It was built from echoes of all the love he had known, all the quiet understanding he had given, all the gentle ways the world had reached him. Each step forward carried him through another fold of light, another shimmer of warmth. And though the corridor had no end, he felt the rhythm of it in his chest, the pulse of life, steady, slow, and endlessly forgiving. Snowball lay down for a moment on a patch of glowing moss, curling his paws beneath him. He closed his eyes, letting the echoes settle around him like a soft blanket. The corridor hummed gently, carrying the memories forward, and he floated within that quiet melody, neither reaching nor leaving, simply present. And in that presence he realized that love did not need holding. It needed only acknowledgement, only soft attention, only the patience to let it be. Snowball lifted his head, ears alert, but his eyes softened into something more than sight, a direct bridge to the listener, whoever they might be. In the hush of night, he imagined the gentle rise and fall of a chest nearby, the slow rhythm of breath, the subtle pulse of life around him. And though he could not speak in words the way humans could, he sent the closest thing he had, a feeling of gratitude, pure and unspoken. He wanted to tell you that the world carries quiet wonders, that each small act of care matters, that even the faintest touch of kindness moves farther than the eye can see. He wanted to tell you that you have been part of something larger than yourself, even if you never noticed, and that your presence, your attention, your quiet awareness is enough. Snowball imagined the stars above the meadow blinking down at you, and each one was a soft echo of every gentle moment you had given or received. The clouds moved slowly across the sky, carrying whispers of comfort and peace. Each rustle in the grass, each distant call of an owl, each flicker of a firefly was part of the same blessing, and it was yours to receive simply by being here, awake or dreaming. He shifted, curling his tail gently, and sent a thought that felt like warmth through fur and bone. May your dreams be soft, may your sleep be long, may your heart carry quiet hope, may you notice the small gifts along your path, the kindnesses, the smiles, the moments of quiet understanding, and may they linger with you in the spaces between waking and sleep. Snowball's paws tapped softly on the glowing moss, sending tiny ripples through the corridor of light. Each ripple was a message: you are seen, you are part of this pattern. You are a thread in the endless tapestry of care and attention. You are not separate. You are not alone. Even the smallest act you perform, even the faintest gesture of love, echoes farther than you imagine. The stars above twinkled in slow, measured rhythm, Snowball imagined the moon casting a pale glow across your dreams, painting soft paths through shadowed corners, guiding you gently toward rest. Each breath you took was a note in the same lullaby, each heartbeat a drum in the quiet orchestra of life. Snowball folded his paws beneath him, ears resting, and sent a final blessing along the invisible currents. May your night be filled with softness. May your heart remember its own capacity for wonder. May the echoes of love follow you through the dark and into dawn. He could not name the feeling, could not shape it in words, but it filled the space around him like mist. Gratitude, peace, hope. The quiet insistence of life continuing in gentle rhythms, beyond control, beyond grasp, yet entirely present. Snowball closed his eyes fully, ears twitching once as the corridor hummed, as the echoes carried forward, as the blessings floated outward in invisible waves. And there, in that moment of stillness, he simply rested, letting the soft tides of the night move through him, letting the world continue, letting love ripple quietly through dreams, clouds, and whispers.